Good morning. Welcome to our speech today. So how this is going to work is I'm going to give you a little bit of an introduction here and introduce us, and then Ryan's going to tell you a lot more about how to manage the complexities of an internal technology platform. And then at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about how, the stuff that they went through might be something that applies to your situation. So, a little bit about myself. I'm Mostek. I'm a senior solution architect from Auth0. I've been there for a few years, and for those of you who don't know what a solution architect does, I get to work with a whole bunch of really cool customers that are doing really interesting and exciting and unique and fun things. And then what I do is I try to take those interesting and unique and fun things and make them as boring as possible so that they conform to standards and follow best practices and patterns so that they're maintainable and secure and all that good stuff. So one of the customers that I've been able to work with some is Cimpress. And so we're happy to welcome our friend Cimpress here to the stage today. And if you're not familiar with who Cimpress is, you've almost certainly heard of one of their flagship brands, Vistaprint. So they are a very well-known customer, and they also happen to be a customer of Auth0. We use them for mass production stuff, business cards, postcards, event giveaways, signage, all that good stuff. And in fact, on your chairs here, you can find a bag that we printed with Vistaprint that you can take home with you today. So Ryan Breen is who's going to present for us today, and he is the Director of API Management at Cimpress. He's been there for about 5 years or so, and he's been one of the integral members in converting their platform to be more of a microservices architecture. And one of the other things that I got to find out about Ryan this week is that he is a vigilant defender of the Chewbacca wiki page. And since he's had a kid about 9 months ago, he hasn't been able to be quite as vigilant as he used to be, so he really wanted me to make a call to action that if everybody here can go to the Chewbacca wiki page and make sure that no teenagers have added aliases to their friends at the end of it, that would be really great. So, thanks, Ryan.
Thank you. Yeah, if you get nothing else from this presentation, please stop. Talk to me afterwards about the Chewbacca situation. It's a crying shame what they do to that Wookiee. He's a hero. But to the matter at hand, I'm actually here to talk to you about SimPress. So as Carlos said, we are the parent company of Vistaprint and a bunch of other brands. I work for the part of SimPress that creates a mass customization platform. This is a platform of software services and solutions that can benefit all of those different brands. So I'm going to talk to you about what mass customization is, why we think it's important to have an internal platform to help offload some of that burden, and talk about the journey that got us there. If you imagine something that is super highly customized, you're going to Etsy and you're saying, I'd like a totem pole in the shape of my family. Somebody's going to sit down with a block of wood and whittle that thing out. It's going to be highly labor intensive. It's going to take a while. On the far other end of the spectrum, you're buying one of a million identical copies of a book. There's no customization at all. So it's all very automated, low unit cost. We try to do something in the middle. Somebody comes to Vistaprint or one of our brand websites and says, here's my logo. I want that on a tote bag, or I want that on 100 or 1,000 business cards. But we do that operation tens of thousands of times a day. So clearly we have to get really good at automating these fairly custom jobs, because we don't have people sitting down whittling out every business card. It would be prohibitively expensive. That's not what our model is. So I wanted to focus, to give you some clarity on the types of things we deliver via our platform, focus on one specific domain, and that's the domain of APIs and UIs that we call Prepress. So these are all the services that get kicked off from the moment you upload that logo to us sending that as a machine-ready document to some physical printing device somewhere to create the thing the customer has ordered. There's a lot of stuff that can go wrong with user-uploaded content. And clearly, maybe it's too low quality to print well, but there's a lot of stuff that's really specific to our domain. You have two very bright images that are close to each other, and it's a glossy surface. The ink's going to bleed together. There's stuff we've learned just happens when you're printing things at that sort of scale with custom documents. That's stuff that we can detect. we can autonomically address in a lot of cases, but it's all stuff that we need to do to make sure that as we're printing out these images for you that show you in this WYSIWYG view, this is the object we're going to create for you. And from the top left is what we actually pulled as we were creating the tote bags. Hopefully it looks a lot like the thing that's on the screen. As we're showing you that contract that, yes, this is the thing we're going to produce, you can have the confidence that when that arrives 2, 3, 4 days later, it is the thing that you thought you were ordering. Because if it isn't, if it looks bad, if the ink bled, if the background color isn't right quite what we promised you, that's going to be a refund. That's going to be a customer who's dissatisfied. That's going to be our model failing. But all of the technology to do this, it's fairly deep, complex machine learning stuff, and it takes a lot of knowledge of the types of printers we're printing on, the materials we're printing on. It's all stuff that's common across everybody in that mass customization space. It's not specific to Vistaprint or any other business in the portfolio, so it's a clear example of something that would make a lot of sense for us to share with other businesses that we work with. But back in 2013, when I joined the company, we were actually known as Vistaprint at the time. So we were one business that had scaled super well in a monolithic environment, right up to the point where we had run out of runway. So we had a 2 million line of C# application that encompassed everything from your merchant-facing customer acquisition stuff to Prepress to shop floor optimization. Everything was in this application. Had to be deployed on physical hardware because at the time there was simply no AWS instance that was large enough for our working set. So we had run out of options in terms of how we scaled. This was also the time frame that you were taking machine learning from academia into industry. A whole lot of obvious applications for Prepress. You're going to add a bunch of GPUs to your web server to scale that. Now we were really locked into this code base. And because it had grown up really over 20 years of history, Vistaprint was founded in 1995, there was a lot of just idiosyncratic code. There wasn't a lot of opportunity to even use open source or SaaS components because it was always just easier to say, oh, we need a new encryption thing, just throw another 1,000 lines of C# on top of the pile. We were feeling very constrained by our decisions. But we were also starting to be more acquisitive. So at the time we were at Vistaprint, we had acquired 2 other companies in that mass customization space. We wanted to be able to share things like Prepress with them, but that really wasn't an option because it was all locked up in our deployment mode. So we engaged in a really big reset, and the whole point of that reset was to launch what we now call the mass customization platform. And the biggest signal that we did first was change the name of the business. And I'm cynical about it on the slide here, but it is a big deal for a publicly traded company to say, no, we have a new ticker symbol. It's that big of a deal for us as a business to say, we are doing a different thing now. And for those of us like me who woke up one day to realize I don't work for Vistaprint, my customer isn't somebody buying business cards. My customer is a software developer at Vistaprint, at Album Printer, at another business that's part of our portfolio who needs these software solutions that can help them do their job better. That's a significant change in our approach. But as we're delivering software to those developers, what's the right way for us to do it? We knew we were locked into this monolithic, top-down technology dictatorship. And we knew that wasn't going to scale. That wasn't the model that we wanted to do for our customers. We decided to go to the logical extreme on the other end, which is wide open, libertarian idealism. Every team has total ownership of their problem space and their problem domain. So you can choose whatever tech stack, you can deploy it however you want, as long as you're creating software that solves real business problems in your domain. That's all we care about. And our belief was that giving everybody this unfettered power to own their domains, everybody would create in their enlightened self-interest the optimal products for their customers, and the combination of those products would be a mass customization platform. And this started out really well. And we did have this incredible burst of energy, enthusiasm. People were excited that they could start using technologies they had only read about for the past decade. They were excited that they could start directly interfacing with their customers, talking to them about, hey, what's your needs? What are the things we haven't met yet? What would it mean for you at another business to have access to some of the Prepress technology we've created over the past 20 years? So we were creating new software daily, weekly. We were making great progress. The problem is nobody was using our software. We were coming up with really great solutions, but because we were reconsidering all of our past assumptions, we were reconsidering every basic principle of what it means to develop software, what it means to deliver an API, everybody was coming up with very different answers to those questions. So we had SOAP, we had REST, we had WebRPC, we had people doing client certs, we had people doing basic auth over HTTP. Every single decision that could be made in delivering APIs was being made. And because everything was so different, we had no standards as to this is what an API is. Nothing was published centrally or in a way that anybody knew how to consume. So if you were a customer at Vistaprint or any of our other businesses, and you had the good fortune to somehow find somebody from the free state of Prepress and you learned how to use one of their APIs, nothing that you learned in that process would help you at all the next time you found an API from the platform that you might want to use, because everything was a new negotiation, a new client you had to write. And the feedback we were getting from our customers is, you don't have a platform. You say you have a mass customization platform, that's not what this is. It's just a collection of software products, and it's not solving our business problems, because we spend as much time writing clients to interface with you as we spend having our business problems solved by you. Now, many of us at the time felt like we had seen this movie or this play before. We had moved to this libertarian states' rights, everybody solves their business problems however they want, but there is no coordination. There is no top-down notion of what it means to define APIs. And we didn't want to go back to that monolithic, that technology dictatorship where everybody has to bring their C# code every 2 weeks. But we knew we needed something, some set of agreements that at least let us define a basic interface to our platform. We didn't have the budget to send everyone to see Hamilton, so we called it an RFC process. And we said, we are going to work together for 3 months to define with all the key stakeholders, so people from the free states of Prepress or every other technology team, to define the sets of things you need to do to create a platform API. And it's a really simple set of rules. This is RFC 1, we still refer to it daily. Every service is REST JSON, you're publishing them in the same place. And critically, we're going to reason about the identity of our callers in the same way. Because if you don't know who your callers are, if your caller can't take their identity and their resources from one API to another, you don't have a platform. But as we looked at identity, this was clearly something we didn't want to build. I mentioned our history of being a not invented here shop. One of the challenges we always had was we would think there's something specific to mass customization or our business that means we should build a thing. No, in this case, what does identity have to do with mass customization? At the same time, so many of the solutions we were looking at buying were very monolithic. They felt like the past we had come from. It was, hey, our solution works like this, and if you have a gateway, and if you plug into it just like this, and your backend looks like this, everything's really easy. But in other scenarios, you're going to have to do some work. What we were trying to build with our mass customization platform was a composable set of microservices API first in our space. What we found with Auth0 was exactly that in the space of identity. They had a platform for identity that felt like what we wanted our platform to grow into in mass customization. So it was a really nice fit and an easy choice. And we found as we rolled out this new approach, as we found that we said, okay, there's a simple set of rules within which you can all innovate. Teams were not overly burdened. Nobody, after we got through the first RFC, nobody was upset that we had taken away their autonomy to decide how they were doing authentication, for example, because they still had full control to innovate in the space of Prepress or whatever domain they were in. And we also found that making that simple agreement that this is how we're managing identity made it a lot easier for us to make even more build versus buy decisions. So if a team at one of the SimPress businesses said, hey, I want to get a SaaS vendor to do log management for me, it was easy for us to say, okay, well, they do SAML, they play nice with Auth0, we've already done the work to manage the identities of all platform participants. So it was easy for us to facilitate access both to our first-party things we were building, as well as third-party solutions that you could find in the market. And we started to hear from customers that, okay, you actually do have a platform now. I am learning how to use a Prepress API, and I'm taking that knowledge to use another API. that organic growth of adoption, because we had made it something that feels like a platform where the parts worked together seamlessly, began to happen. So I wanted to reflect a little bit on those quick 4 years of progress we had made. When we started with Auth0 in 2015, we had very simple goals. It was absolutely a skunkworks. And the very first thing I did with the Auth0 rules engine, I wrote a thing that would call out to, at the time, a hip chat room to tell us every time somebody logged in for the first time. Because we wanted to see the moment our CEO logged into an application for the first time. That was when we thought we would know, hey, we've made it. The big guy is logging into an application important enough to be secured by Auth0. It took about 2 months for us to get to that point, which is actually relatively quick. And then I immediately deleted that rule because that actually was kind of creepy. But as of today, so this is just 3-4 years later, and we have 1,000 APIs and UIs secured by Auth0. Every month, we've got 9,000 employees logging into at least one of those applications, those UIs, and we're well over 100 million machine-to-machine transactions using OAuth2 bearer tokens signed by Auth0 every day. And this is a huge change for us. I mean, you heard me talk about how not invented here and insular Vistaprint historically was. Vistaprint just this year chose Auth0 to secure end user traffic. This is the first time any of our merchants has said we're willing to trust a vendor with our most precious commodity, the identities of our end users. Vistaprint has millions of users logging in a month. Based on the strength of the relationship with Auth0 building the platform, Vistaprint had the confidence to make that bet on Auth0 for their rebrand. And back to Prepress, that example of why you would build a platform like this deep technical domain that you want to share across all these different businesses. Cimpress is now a parent of a dozen or more businesses in the mass customization space. Yesterday, 12 of those businesses made at least 10,000 calls to Prepress APIs. A couple of them, you could probably guess one of them is Vistaprint, made millions of calls. But this just shows you both the depth and the breadth of the adoption of the platform. And that's just in a few years. We have some technology that we think could benefit you, and you don't have to build it yourself. And we are seeing that adoption because the platform's working for people. So before I hand it back to Carlos, just a few lessons learned. There is that tension between autonomy and user experience. Yes, you want to give your developers the power to make their own choices, but you have to understand the point at which that's going to inconvenience your customers and make your customers feel like they're reading your org chart. One of the ways that we found to really defang those arguments internally is talking to our teams on the platform and saying, look, you focus on building the best free states of Prepress. You focus on the things that are your differentiating value. And everything else will either have standards, or we'll have third parties, we'll have vendors, or we'll have things we can deliver from the platform that can make it easier for you to get your value. But as you're evaluating those third parties, as you're looking for vendor solutions, make sure you're only finding vendors that match the way you're trying to do business. If you're developer first, if you're API oriented, make sure that the vendors you're working with share those ideals. And for us, in the space of identity, that vendor was Auth0. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. All right, so, is there a pattern here? How many of you have already, either experienced this or thinking about making a change or have had to deal with this at some point in your career? It's a fairly common thing that we end up with, right? And Cimpress had this kind of from two different angles, right? They had their, monolithic, big, large application that they wanted to break up and make it easier to deploy, make it easier to test, make it easier to move and innovate and add new things. But then they also had the situation where they were acquiring a lot of different vendors and different things, and so they had a lot of different applications that they're also trying to bring into this platform. And when you do that, when you move from this monolithic web app to a distributed architecture, some things get a lot easier, right? You can start to deploy, you can start to isolate things, you can provide some levels of autonomy to your different applications, but some things get a lot harder. Right? And especially if you start off with, letting everybody do everything their own way and you don't have any rules or commonality there, things can get really complex and really tough very fast. And so it's important to come up with, a set of commonality, a set of rules that you can apply to different things. And the best way to do that when you're coming up with those rules is to really think about standards and best practices and using specifications, because we really want to learn from other people's mistakes. We don't want to always have to only learn from our own mistakes, right? We want to be able to stand on the shoulders of giants. And one of the best ways to do that is to adopt the hard work that people have put into specs like OIDC and Auth0 and SAML and things like that. And in particular, when you're looking at things like identity that clearly is going to have to be shared between a lot of these different applications, and it's also something that is very sensitive, it's very secure, you're dealing with privacy data, you're dealing with people breaking into your system. It's incredibly important to do that, to not just try to invent everything yourself. And as you do this transformation, as you do decide to move forward with what you're doing, I encourage you to step back and think about your problem space. Don't just try to think, okay, well, this is how we've always done it. Here are the business requirements that we had before. We want to make sure that we can replicate that in the new environment. You don't want to do that, right? You're trying to come up with something new. You're trying to get away from your legacy problems. So don't migrate your legacy stuff into your new environment. And one of the areas where that can be very impactful is with identity. And there's always this talk about this battle between user experience and security, right? And we want to try to maximize both as much as we can. And when you use things like OIDC and Auth0, you don't have to do that, right? You have things like centralized authentication and rules and other things that you can do to try to make it easier and try to provide that platform in a way that's actually easy to use and something that's safe. And I'd even take that a step further and say that your developer experience can also be easier when you do that, right? When you have a centralized platform, then you can focus on what you're really good at, which is your core business values, instead of something like identity that you can let somebody else who's an expert in that take care of. So I have just a couple of minutes left. So does anybody have any questions for Ryan or myself? Any brave souls out there? Yeah, sure.
So this is maybe a little deeper tech than this, but once you get the auth token, there's been a couple of sessions at this conference where people have either advocated for an API gateway in front of all your microservices that will then deal with the auth token, and you trust anything behind the API gateway, versus distributing the checking of the tokens that you get to each microservice. Which direction did you go and why?
Yeah, this is an area we have a very passionate opinion. We distribute because, and this was also part and parcel of our architectural principles. We didn't want a API gateway. We didn't want that felt monolithic for us. But we also, from a security perspective, we do a lot of authorization decisions in our platform. So I might be handling order data on behalf of a merchant because I'm a care agent, a customer support agent with delegated authority to do so. If I'm asking for order data, I should be giving my token to the order data API, so it only gives me my order data. Anytime you introduce this notion of, well, I'm trusting this service is behind the gateway or behind the firewall, so I can just get all order data, and then 5 hops downstream, somebody will do the right thing and filter that to show the caller what they're actually allowed to see. We just bit the bullet and said every API is responsible for validating the caller, and you're responsible for propagating the identity of any platform participant all the way to the leafiest leaf node, so that everybody has the information they need to make the right calls as to what data should this person see, what is it safe to hand back to the caller. So that's the direction we went with it.
Are you passing on all tokens or ID tokens?
Access tokens. Yep. Actually, both. That's a fair point. So it's access tokens in the case of M2M, and they're ID tokens in the case of an end user who logs into an application, and then that gets propagated across API calls. Our internal authorization solution, which is something that we built and layer on top of Auth0, that can traffic in both. It's what's the sub of the caller. I don't really care if it's a programmatic client versus a human. I just need to know what that caller's allowed to access.
You said a few years back when you realized that you thought you had a platform, your customer said, this isn't a platform, right? What was the internal conversation like with all the other stakeholders to kind of realize that a change needed to be made?
It was pretty easy to see, given the amount of investment the business was putting in us and the lack of uptake we had seen from the platform. I mean, it really was this sort of existential crisis. It's, okay, we've given you a year and a half. You say you're building a bunch of platform stuff. Nobody is using anything. So let's maybe look in the mirror and see what we're doing wrong. That gave us the real drive and got us over that initial hurdle of like, but my autonomy, you told me I could do everything myself. It wasn't easy, but we knew we had to make a change because we really had no uptake and we had 250 people working on a thing. It's hard to justify. As a startup, you probably would have gone out of business already. And as a large organization that needs to justify its investments, it's, hey, we need to make it easier for people to use these tools. Otherwise, what are we doing here?